In light of our operating environment, in light of COVID-19, and so forth. And after Durmi speaks, we'll ask our Honorable Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee to also just give a brief remarks. And then we'll also ask our colleague, Opo, to also share remarks on that particular topic.
We decided to get together to look into the environment that we're working in relation to investigative journalism. Opo will give us a talk. It's an informal talk for about 15-20 minutes, looking into the state of investigative journalism in the country, and as well as his own experience, which obviously is connected to the work that he was doing, although he was doing it not particularly operating for any other formal platform. He was using social media to look into issues of public interest, and he was on one of the biggest stories that we've seen this year. And that story is still with us, and we hope as media colleagues you will still follow it up. We certainly have an interest in it. We will start publishing stuff by the end of the month. We hope that we will continue doing that work. Just briefly to introduce ourselves here. By that I mean the guys that will be operating from here. So what we did was, we sat together with some colleagues who are here, some who are not. We did some consultations about what we can do to form something that focuses on investigative journalism. So we did the consultation, the concept notes, proposals, put together a thing. So we formed something called Center for Public Interest Journalism. That's just the formal name operating. But we're going to have an operating name that we will operate under, something called the News Rocks. That will be the name that we will be running under. The other center is just a registration name to fulfill all the formalities of registration, which we have done. What we'll be doing basically here is what you are already doing. There's nothing new under the sun that we'll be doing that you are not doing. It's just the investigative journalism. We'll be looking for investigative stories in relation to public affairs, issues of accountability, issues of corruption, issues of abuse of office, abuse of power, and the betrayal of public trust by those who are elected to run the country, to rule the country, to deliver certain services to us, today social services. That's what we're interested in. We are specifically interested in public accountability issues, and obviously in the public interest. So welcome all of you colleagues. We are very grateful and glad that you are here to share some experiences, some notes with us in relation to the work that we do, which is journalism. We are here to pursue that goal, the goal of holding our leaders to account. So briefly, I will let Nigel roll on with this program.
Ask him about a story I saw in the Independent, alleging that he is the one who instructed the Director General of the ZIMPAX to authorize a Chinese mine to explore in Hwange National Parks. My interest in Hwange National Parks is very clear because that's part and parcel of natural resources that find themselves in the area where I come from. But I just want to thank the Media Alliance of Zimbabwe and other stakeholders that have invited us here. In our view, journalism by its nature is supposed to be the platform through which citizens are afforded their right to learn about events and decisions that affect their lives. It is apparent from the provisions of Sections 61 and Section 62 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe that Zimbabwean citizens by nature want to have access to information that has got to do with things and decisions that affect their lives. And in order to enable the enjoyment of those rights that are provided for in the Constitution, Parliament has been very swift and diligent in putting in place the laws facilitating the enjoyment of those rights. We have so far seen the repeal of the, let me label it, draconian IPA, which has been replaced by the Freedom of Information Act, and almost we are almost finalizing the Zimbabwe Media Commission Bill. And we are also seized with the Cyber Security and Data Protection Bill, which we are doing with our sister committees. I'm sure members of the journalistic community who have witnessed and followed the process of lawmaking we have undertaken as a committee will agree with me that the process has been inclusive, it has been thorough, and very well-meaning. We have agreed amongst ourselves as a committee that our lawmaking process will be such as to be not only patriotic, I mean patriotic in the real sense, right, but also meant for posterity rather than partisan political interests. I'm proud to say that as chairperson of the Information Media and Broadcasting Services Committee, you can really identify our political identities when you find us together, because we are driven more by the cause rather than by other side shows. So we are a united committee that embarks on ensuring that when we want to make a law, we make that law for posterity and for nation building. And it is our hope that the executive will move with speed to bring to Parliament critical outstanding laws, such as the amendment of the Broadcasting Services Act. Be that as it may, the committee is worried about the conduct of the executive in complying with certain statutes that are already in place. A number of examples of lack of political will to match the spirit of the law with the conduct of the executive have been observed. Sticking out like a sore thumb is the lack of interest of the executive to make the public media to comply with the requirements of Section 61, subsection 4 of the Constitution, that requires such media to be free to determine independently their editorial content, to be impartial, and afford fair opportunity for the presentation of divergent views and dissenting opinions. Instead, we have witnessed overt interference with the editorial content of the media from Mununtapa building, partiality of proportions that one would think that management of the public media houses holds joint meetings with management of the ruling party HQ. Anyway, it's not surprising. When I heard about the story of Tafadzwa Mgwadi, that Tafadzwa Mgwadi at one time had been deployed at Herald, and then later on he was pulled and then put at HQ of the ruling party. One then sees this symbiotic relationship between public media and the ruling party, which is contrary to the provisions of Section 61, subsection 4. And we are worried as a committee, because our expectation is that when we set up laws, the executive should ensure that they comply with the provisions of those laws. Divergent views and dissenting opinions have had to resort to other media platforms, as the public media doesn't only shut them out, but goes on an onslaught to attack such views and opinions, as we have seen in the last few days, where ZBC has been broadcasting not only very false, but also malicious videos about state victims of state abuse. You saw a video that was circulating about Joanna Mamombe and the other two. It is very clear that that video is something that was doctored, but the ZBC went on to produce it. And look at this. That is a matter that is still before the courts. It is sub judice. Whether you like it or not, if really it is evidence, they were supposed to keep that evidence until the court processes are done. But what do? They go on to produce them. And right now, the citizens are dissecting and showing how false that video has been. And what does it do to the integrity of the public broadcaster under that kind of circumstance? So we are worried as a committee if we are not seeing laws being complied with. We have seen threats, we have seen arrests, we have seen abductions, we have seen persecution of journalists, which continue unabated. In the presence of good laws that we have made as parliament, to say we want a law that protects journalists, that gives an environment where journalism can be practiced freely and without intimidation. The situation has never gotten lower than my brother's arrest, Opiol Shingon. We are aware that before Opiol Shingon was arrested, there was a Twitter threat from the permanent secretary of the Information, Media and Publicity. I mean, that is the ministry which is supposed to deal with our media environment. Instead of making our media environment to be good, we saw a threat. And a few days later, indeed, we saw Opiol being arrested. And we believe that is quite unfortunate and quite unexpected. Persecution of journalists is justifiably viewed as an attempt by those in power to muzzle the release of information, usually related to their abuse of office or abuse of public resources. We are well aware that our society is entrenched in a sense of entitlement by those who are in power. The situation is risky to the journalists, as those whom you investigate are unashamed to do anything to cause physical and emotional harm to those who seek to expose them. Ladies and gentlemen, struggles come in different nature and with different consequences. However, what should guide us is the cause to the struggle. Investigative journalism is meant to unearth any form of unethical or criminal conduct by people in authority, which conduct causes harm to the public good. Should we therefore abandon the good cause because of these threats? Where would the struggle for the people of color in the United States of America be if Martin Luther King Jr. and many other civil rights activists had focused on the threats other than on the cause? Today, as we aspire to build our nation into a truly democratic and progressive society, heroes of the struggle should arise. Our society currently has very weak and compromised national institutions. We cannot rely on them to make the powerful to account. This leaves the media sector as the only institution that still has some semblance of independence to unearth the numerous ills being perpetrated by those in positions of power. I'm aware of your own weaknesses as the media sector. Some of them involving the public media I have already highlighted. In the private sector, the major threat to good journalism is the power of ownership. We have seen shifts in editorial content of media houses correlated to change in the shareholding structure. So if this shareholding structure changes, the editorial content also changes. And that reflects to us lack of independence of that media house to the ownership. I shudder to think of what would be the outcome of an instruction by an owner of a media house to an investigative journalist not to publish certain material they would have unearthed. Such are the challenges we have to overcome if we are going to improve accountability of governance in the country. And of course, like all struggles, there shall be heroes and villains. However, we should continue to be driven by the cause. On our part as Parliament, we want to assure you that we shall continue to discharge our duties of making laws, representing the citizens, and making government to account without fear or favor. Thank you, and God bless the journalistic community.
But the good thing is the next person on our dialogue is not a politician, but a journalist. So I'm sure you keep the remarks relatively concise and also delved into our industrial issues. So thanks, and over to you, Oppo.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me, colleagues. Initially, I thought I was just coming to see Dumi and some friends, hopefully spent the rest of the day sitting over there. The last time I saw Dumisani, he came to my house. And there's always the tradition with Dumi. He came with a blue label for me. And we didn't know that it was a parting shot for a while. And we talking about investigative journalism, Dumi has always stood out for me as one of the best investigative journalists that we have in this country. So when people make reference to me as an investigative journalist, sometimes I find it very discomforting, because I know there are people like Dumi who have done a lot of work, but we're at a time where our country is being looted left, right, and center by the Mnangagwa regime. And we are also at a time where people are afraid to tell the truth as it is, to bring out information and put it out there. The Honorable Member of Parliament has mentioned some of the reasons. We have captured public media which has not delivered or discharged on its responsibilities for over 30 years, as long as I can remember. And we have the private media where journalists are badly paid. During our time when I just finished the training at Harare Polytechnic, the amount of money that we were getting as students at Harare Polytechnic was enough to look after our parents, although it was just a stipend. I remember I got my internship at the Horizon magazine with Ed Moyes and Jacob Tambara. And whatever we got, we could look after our families, and we could send siblings to school. But today's journalists are not able to do so because of an economy that has literally collapsed. So whilst I understand those who blame the journalists, I also look at why the journalists find themselves in such a situation. The disclosures that I did that got me into trouble with Mnangagwa were not unique. They had actually been reported on by ZimLive, and I think Newsday had done a piece as well. And Elias Mambo had done something, The only unique thing that I did was to look at the story and say, there is much more to the story than what I've read so far. And then that's when I started digging. But the way I started digging, it required me to have tools which at times some journalists don't have. Just to have a normal internet connection at home. A lot of journalists don't have that. So it's difficult for them to do the work that they're supposed to do. So for instance, there was a very false narrative whilst I was in prison that I was getting information from people in government. I never got information from people in government. What I simply did was to look at what Elias Mambo had written, and then he gave me one document which had been signed off by the Permanent Secretary of Finance. And then I started engaging, and some of you will remember, I started engaging the Permanent Secretary on Twitter, and he started responding by giving me false information without, he didn't realize that I actually had been given that document by Elias Mambo. And then when I looked at drugs, it had been registered, supposedly, in the UAE. What I simply did was to go to the UAE Carbon Registry and put the name drugs, and there was nothing. And I went to the Carbon Registry in Hungary, where the money had been wired, and there was nothing. And then I spoke to the FT journalist responsible for Southern Africa, Joseph Kotoro, who had done some investigations as well. And in Switzerland, it was just a shelf company. Then I looked at some of the documents that were now being released by journalists. And I looked at Namibia, and this company was supposed to have been registered in 2018. Again, I went to the company registry in Namibia. It had been registered actually in 2015. And I went to the Namibian Finance Ministry. The company had not paid any taxes since inception. It was just a shelf company. And I then looked at what it had brought in and asked some of the guys who were linked to the company. And then we discovered that it had brought stuff from China. It paid $380 for that stuff in China. And yet it had billed the Zimbabwe government $67,000 for stuff that they paid for $380,000. That is industrial looting. And some of the things that were now happening, people were panicking. The president's family panicked. They issued a statement saying they had nothing to do with this company. And this statement was issued via George Charamba. And the same company issued a statement again the same day saying that they had nothing to do with what they call the first family. And then the flag went up for me. I said, there's no Swiss company or a Swiss executive who talks about the first family. It's a Zimbabwe phenomenon, you know. And I looked at the two letters and did some textual analysis and then realized that they'd been written by one person. And then I challenged George Charamba and he didn't respond. So I'm saying this because I want to explain that there's nothing special that I did. I just happened to have a huge following on social media, and I just happened to manage to dig a little deep more than others had done. In fact, I remember talking to Dumisani at the time, saying to Dumi, I haven't done anything. I'm just looking at things that should have been looked at, but were not looked at. And for me, investigative journalism, as I've said before, is something, it's not my terrain. But for me, at this point in time, is the much needed journalistic tool in this country. Because we have, as I was saying during an interview, 2,000 Zimbabwean women die giving birth every year in this country. And 2,000 Zimbabwean women dying every year is like 15 jumbo jets crashing every year and killing Zimbabwean women, pregnant Zimbabwean women. And there is a reason why that is happening. It's because money is being looted. We have the biggest hospital in this country. It's a Harare hospital, contrary to what people say about Pari. Pari is not the biggest. It's a group of hospitals, but the biggest hospital is Harare hospital, which is now Salem Dabe hospital. It only has 2 maternity theaters. They were built in 1977, and only one of them is working. The investigations that I started following on drugs, they involved 60 million. That is what they wanted to loot. Yet, Harare Hospital, Parenyatwa Hospital, Kitunguza Hospital, Mpilo Hospital, UBH Hospital, and Engucheni, the 6 of them, they only require 50 million a year to run smoothly without any shortages. Only 50. But these guys who threw me into prison wanted to steal 60 million of COVID funds. That money could have run all our hospitals for the whole year. And yet for the past 3 months, nurses are not going to work. People are dying. There's a silent genocide. So I'm so excited about this project that Dumi and his team has started, because for me now, I can read whilst I'm at home the reasons why we don't have theaters at Harare Hospital. Who is stealing what? Where is the money going? All that kind of stuff is what we need in order to make the correct decisions in how we interact with public life and how we interact with public officials. So if you look at the situation that we have at the moment, I just came out of Chikurubi prison. All prisoners in Chikurubi, except those who are coming to court, don't have masks, this mask, 6 to 8 cents. Danish Mbuaya and his team wanted to sell, they were selling this for $24 US, something that costs 6 to 8 cents. And that's the reason why prisoners don't have masks. because the money is being looted. When my doctor came, Dr. Nyasha Maboreke, came to see me and wanted to check my high blood pressure, the prison hospital does not have a high blood pressure checking machine. And yet, Chikurubi has got over 2,500 prisoners who are there. We were living in a cell we were living in a cell about 40 to 44 people per prison cell. And yet those prison cells are meant for 16 inmates. Again, it points to the corruption that's taking place, that has been taking place and that has been superintended by ZANU-PF, resulting in them failing to construct more prisons. So they will just pick you in that prison. Colonial prison that was left by the colonial government. So it's important for journalists to understand that our problems that we face as a country today, they start from, number one, the failure to comply with the Constitution. I talk a lot about reforms because that is the language that people use. But in essence, what we need is for ZANU-PF to simply comply with the Constitution. Stop looting money that is meant for public institutions. Once they start complying with the Constitution, then there's no need for all this talk about dialogue. Once they stop looting, there's no need for us to even talk about why hospitals have been shut down, because hospitals will start functioning again. And that is rooted in the stuff that Dumisani and his team are about to start doing now. They've been doing it for years, but they're starting to do it in a different format, which is investigative journalism. I think once we have government officials and public officials who understand that there are journalists out there whose main job is nothing but just to dig at what's happening in public life, you will start to see a shift. You will start to see people taking things seriously. When I was thrown into Chikurubi prison, one of the things that the president said to someone who's a government minister was that I had crossed the line. I had insulted his family. I had tainted his name. And yet I had done none of those things. I simply told the truth. If the truth meant that the president's name was going to be tainted, so be it. But we should not be afraid of telling the truth because I'll be thrown into prison. That's the nature of the work that we chose as journalists, more so as investigative journalists, because we are going to be uncovering a lot of rot in regards to what's happening in our country. If you look at how everything has collapsed in our country, it comes back to just one thing. If we have more investigative journalism, you will see institutions will start working properly. Look at Air Zimbabwe. We inherited Air Zimbabwe with was it 19 or 20 planes? 18 planes. Yeah. Today it is one plane which is flying. Again, it's looting. If we start digging and start putting out the names that this is what so and so took, even those that looted 10 years ago, we still have a responsibility to reflect on what happened and where the money was taken to. And as you saw with the drugs issue, you know, these days it's so easy to trace money. I can tell you that some of the money that is being looted is in Bank One in Mauritius. These things are easy to find out, but you need a dedicated team and a team that is able to withstand the pressures. That's why I'm happy with what the Honorable Member of Parliament has said. We need your support. You need to support these guys, and once they get that kind of support, you know, our country will start to thrive. Because I don't want to be known as somebody who's looted any money. And if Dumisani and his team can prove that I've done so, and I'm a public official, then I need to leave office. But you can see how long it took for Mnangagwa to finally let go of his nephew, Obadiah Moyo. he wouldn't let go of that guy because there was no culture of the media being dogged. I mean, there are other newspapers like Daily News, they didn't even bother to cover the story. You know, they were not even covering the story, and yet it was like the story that was being covered by Namibian newspapers, South African newspapers, you know. So that's why I'm happy that you guys have started this, and I wish you well, and I look forward to be cheering on the sidelines. You know, it's a great thing, and congratulations.
Thank you. Excellent.